Avoid becoming timid. You're merely a dropout from high school who is going to teach me German. Direct threw the documents at me in jest. I understand. I was resentful, but I dutifully began to look through the materials and was immediately struck dumb by what I read. We are unable to accept this deal in any way. It might put the survival of our business in danger. Huh. I quickly translated and quickly perused the document, highlighting its main points. My prospective boss Derek and the other executives in attendance looked shocked. My name is George. I was employed by this company for about 20 years, first as an apprentice on a part-time basis. I was recently called back to the central office following 10 years of service at a foreign branch. I walked inside the busy New York headquarters feeling melancholy. Known for his witty and easygoing demeanor, my father vanished the moment he found out my mother was expecting. Growing up in a home with just one parent, I saw my mother's immense challenges. She put in a lot of overtime doing piecework late into the night while working throughout the day at a supermarket and cafe. My mother encouraged me to go high school while I was in my 3rd year of middle school, but I decided against it since I wanted to support her financially and I knew she worked nonstop. Upon realizing that her overwork was causing her health to deteriorate, I didn't hesitate to begin working as soon as middle school ended. I started working a part-time job at a plant that makes computer parts. It gave me plenty of work to keep me occupied in addition to meals and a transportation stipend. It was the ideal job for me. Everyone at the plant was quite kind to me, maybe because a kid had just joined them. They gave me tips on how to do better, more productive work, and even how to wash work clothes properly. I was even given veggies by some to bring back to my mother. Everyone loved me, and I enjoyed my work because of their thorough coaching. It was a fantastic stroke of luck that President Thompson saw my rapid improvement and extended an offer to hire me on a full-time basis. I happily purchased a present for my mother after I was given a bonus for my well-received work. But my mother, who was always weak, died 4 years later, leaving me all by myself. It was during this time of loss and depression that President Thompson approached me with a chance. What about working abroad? We're going to help you with your German. Observing my struggles in my homeland, he extended this opportunity to me. An underperforming overseas division of the corporation was established. Without my mother, I felt lost, so I took the job offer overseas. It was really difficult to adjust to working in a different nation. Numerous misunderstandings were caused not just by the language barrier, but also by cultural differences. At first, there were problems like arriving late and producing poor quality work. I disagreed with the local employees a lot, but through talking to one another, we eventually started to understand one another. Some even sobbed for the mother they had never met when I told them about my upbringing. I got support from local figures and was invited to family feasts. I steadily established a reputation for myself at the branch office in this way. 10 years later, I was comfortable speaking German and handling agreements with other parties. I was then told to go back home. I tried so hard not to think about my mother for 10 years. It surprised me to be standing in front of the headquarters 10 years later. The headquarters had built a brand new, very attractive building while I was working hard abroad. It was a glass-topped tower, manned by armed guards all hours of the day. Good to see you again. You've had success abroad. You have a temporary role set up for you, so please give it your all there. President Thompson greeted me with a pleasant smile. My status as an employee of the corporation remained uncertain. They didn't appear to know where to put me to the best use. President Thompson greeted me and then hurriedly led me to the sales division. The sales team seemed young and enthusiastic at first glance. My name is George, and I will begin working with you right now. It's nice to meet you. I said hello. Everybody grinned in response to my greeting. I had assumed that I would be able to settle in easily at the headquarters. However, a man quickly destroyed my hopeful view. I greeted Durek, the department manager, who was my new employer, the following day. Good morning. My salutation received no response. He appeared unhappy, despite his cordial demeanor during my introduction the previous day. I said, "Good morning," once more, in case he hadn't heard. Calm. You were heard. All of a sudden, I was subjected to foul language. A mocking voice then followed, making fun of me even more as I stood there in shock. "You're older than me and a high school dropout. Yes, you traveled abroad or whatever, but I suppose that's simply because you're too naive and inappropriate, don't you think?" While I had previously experienced disdain for being a dropout, I wasn't prepared for it to happen here. Derek went on, leaving me stunned. With a contemptuous glare in my direction, he said, "Guarding a useless dropout like you was just my bad luck," before turning back to his desk. My coworkers informed me over lunch that Derek's outstanding educational background made him an elite. He used to look down on people he thought were beneath him and flatter those he thought were superior. He was disliked for showing off his status, but he put up a nice front, so criticizing him would just fuel animosity. The folks at work appeared to have accepted the situation to some extent. It seems that Derek was modest at first, but grew haughty after he hired assistants. I attempted to start my true assessment of Derek, but he offered me no clarification. As a recent high school dropout, you can manage this workload. They told me to just do some menial tasks, not even allowing me to handle the documents properly. No, I was assigned here by President Thompson, so please let me see the contracts or something, I replied. As I already stated, this place does not employ a worthless high school dropout. Whoa, hold on. Derek remarked arrogantly. He said to me, "From now on, clean with her," after phoning a local part-time cleaner. What? The part-time employee and I were both taken aback. "Document work is too good for an incompetent dropout," he grumbled. I glanced at the part-time employees, stunned. With a sly smile, Derek set down a cloth and broom in front of me. "Hurry up! Or does a dropout not even know how to clean?" I was starting to get frustrated, but I didn't want to stir up issues so soon after coming back. Plus, my coworkers were staring at me all the time. They were undoubtedly scared that Derek would take a swipe at them next. I forced myself to control my feelings as I took up the broom and rag and got to work cleaning. Offering me coffee in the break room, the part-time employee stated, "Well, it looks like we're done for today." "I'm grateful." I said, "That Derek is a pretty bad person." She revealed that, simply for being a member of the cleaning staff, she too was treated with contempt. Emily Thompson was her name. We grew close since we were close in age and experienced the same hardships in coping with Derek's excessive demands. I gave her some housekeeping advice in exchange for her teaching me some sewing methods that I had picked up from assisting my mother with her housework. Derek's haughty demeanor only became worse in the interim. He put me on mundane jobs like photocopying and making tea, which are usually assigned to new hires. He would not even show me the documents when I asked to see them. He would grudgingly give them to me only after I begged for them. While my coworkers would offer me pitying looks, they appeared to be apprehensive about facing his wrath. I didn't harbor resentment toward them, as I recognized how they felt. Subsequently, they would apologize and covertly present the documents to me, facilitating my work without drawing Derek's notice. On the list of possible contract applicants, I came across an unsettling organization one day. The foreign corporation was infamous for not making payments and for not fulfilling orders. When I worked at the branch office, I seem to have noted it as a hazardous venture. If we can secure a contract with any of these, it could significantly grow our company, and my achievement will be huge. With excitement, Derek said. In fact, we wouldn't have to keep paying the outsourced management firm a fortune if we could put this company's Management Eye technology into practice. Derek was clearly excited, driven by a desire for achievement, but I felt uneasy about that firm. I had my disagreements with Derek, but I couldn't allow the business to take a risk. It would be wiser, in my opinion, to learn more about that business. It's best to exercise caution when dealing with certain dubious companies that operate abroad, I'd advised, passing him a guide that included the branch's warning standards. But he knocked the paper out of my hand and scattered it all over the floor. "What are you doing?" I let out a cry. Aha! As if there was any value to a document authored by a dropout from high school. "Avoid poking your nose where it shouldn't be," he mocked. Talking to him was obviously pointless. I pondered whether Derek's kind was typical of this organization. Emily walked over to me in the cafe, groaning loudly. We had gotten to know one another well by then. "Did Derek treat you badly once more?" "You're not to blame," she remarked. "He didn't even glance at the manual I made, just knocked it over," I responded. "That is quite awful." "What did the handbook cover?" she inquired. I was unable to simply educate Emily, an outside contractor, about the manual because it contained proprietary company information. I thought she would be disappointed when I told her this, but she just grinned broadly. "George, you're incredibly sincere. You'll undoubtedly experience better days with your diligence," she informed me. Her grin made me feel better. Emily's gesture of rewarding me for my hard work with handmade cookies inspired me. I plucked up the guts to go talk to Derek. I asked to go with him, even as an errand boy, because I was fascinated about his approaches to contract negotiations and signing. He asked in jest, "You want to shine my shoes?" I said, "Yes, I'll do it." He spoke with contempt, saying, "Fine, but remember, someone like you shouldn't even be part of this." I was given the opportunity to take part in the negotiation, which was embarrassing. Derek had indicated that the other party was supposed to visit our office at 2:00 p.m. for a meeting. In the afternoon, I entered the meeting room door with this sliver of hope, but it was entirely empty when I got there. I found out that the meeting had concluded early in the morning as I hurried to the office. I turned back to my work and noticed Derek grinning. "Hey, remember how I said the meeting was at 11:00 a.m.? He asked, "What's this mess now?" "What are you trying to say? Wasn't that meant to happen around 2:00 p.m.? Confused, I asked. I said, quite plainly, 11:00 a.m. He made fun of the fact that a high school dropout couldn't even tell the time. I then realized that Derek had been playing me. "What kind of person are you, Derek? Is there something wrong with me?" "It's not your place to speak up, you low achiever." I was unable to attend the contract meetings because of this. I opened the cookies Emily had given me covertly since I was feeling low. Then an incredible event took place. "Hi, you inept person. Don't you dare think you can take a break." Derek took the cookies from me and crushed them into dust under his shoe. "How were you able to do that?" "Those cookies belonged to Emily." "Aha, that maid who cleans. Ideal for someone who lives on the bottom like you." Was it my fate to be viewed in this manner, simply for not completing my high school education? For me, I could take it, but I couldn't bear Emily being made fun of too. It's enough. I have some opinions of my own on this. Derek initially appeared surprised by my firm tone, but he soon became enraged. "What? You're refusing to obey me? You call me incompetent all the time, but what knowledge do you actually have about me? You never even attempted to recognize my potential. It must be so simple for you to simply look down on me." Derek slammed a hefty page in front of me, clearly sensing that this had touched a nerve. "So you're able to read this, correct? Hey, Mr. Middle School Dropout, teach me some German." Recognized. I opened the document and began to read. It seems like the transaction today involved a contract. If this is approved, it will represent a significant step forward for me. Disregarding the gloating Derek in the background, I perused the document further and came across a troubling revelation. This might bankrupt the business. I was shocked to see Derek taking the contract away from me as I looked up. A dropout from middle school Can't understand German, of course. Restart with the alphabet, he stated in his typical condescending manner. I didn't care about it now, though. What topic are you discussing? We run the risk of losing our business if we accept this arrangement. I threw caution to the wind and hurried to the president's office, yelling at Derek. President Thompson paled as he read the contract and heard my explanation, but he was still shocked by my abrupt arrival. Derek was instantly called by him. I'm sorry, President Thompson. This fool just walked in and started messing around. What the heck is this about, on earth? President Thompson called in other executives, and I brought up a few alarming concerns during our conversation. Is this the contract from today's deal? Yes, Derek said, but President Thompson's yell overpowered her. Derek, are you attempting to put this company out of business? Look at this, no delivery date mentioned. It was surprising that the contract didn't include a delivery date and only required payment in advance of work commencing. As I read the contract, I quickly translated it. President Thompson and the other executives became ghostly pale. The other party's delivery date is not specified, but we have a deadline for payment. That's the issue. Well, they said they were short on funds to build the system, so once we transfer the money, they'll deliver it soon enough. Derek attempted to refute my assertions, but he became agitated. I think he sensed something wasn't quite right, but he didn't want to concede. Derek attempted to argue with me, but I calmly said, No, there's a real possibility that they could just take our money and disappear. Derek was getting desperate. What are you saying? I have personally witnessed the company's system. What if that was just a sample to gain our trust? Derek became enraged and yelled at me, but each time he spoke, his words were jumbled. The pact lacked legitimacy. It was essentially just a verbal one. In the event of conflict, it would just result in a pointless dispute based on he said, she said. It was, however, a particular provision that concerned us more. The cost of updates for any deficiencies will be borne by us as needed. It was printed in minuscule, difficult-to-read German. No maximum limit on the sum was specified, and accepting such terms may result in significant financial obligations. This indicates that you haven't carefully read the contract. These problems would have become obvious right away with a little care. Nah, such a large organization could never possibly mislead us. The contractor, a significant participant, has been in the news a lot lately, particularly in the foreign countries where I have been deployed. Dealing with foreign corporations frequently implies that our laws don't apply, in contrast to America where confidence is crucial. Derek's face went hot and then pale as I expressed these worries to him. I recently agreed to their offered contract. When we spoke, there was no issue, but the document itself seems to indicate different, doesn't it? A contract is hard to revoke once it has been stamped. We might not even succeed in suing an international corporation. For this reason, as a precaution, we at our branches use milestone-based or split payment systems rather than making large upfront payments. Contracts are essential because the opposing side is waiting for us to step into their trap. Derek was shaking and biting his lip, clearly angry that I was always challenging him, but I didn't have time for him. President Thompson, I'd like to speak with the business. We should be able to handle that as we haven't signed a deal yet. Yes, do it, please. I apologize for requiring you to tidy up this mess. Derek, myself, and a few other execs got in touch with the counterpart. They arrived with great anticipation, supposing the contract to be finalized. But when they saw not only Derek, but other employees queued up, they became perplexed. Negotiations with the executives was challenging because the opposite side consistently avoided taking accountability. Derek simply recoiled in the middle of the intense German discussions. Anyway, these stipulations are unacceptable to us. We must, at the absolute least, alter the terms of payment. But Derek gave his approval. The contract was not read by him. Although it's our responsibility, these terms are not appropriate. It's likely that the other side was holding out for the promise of a huge payment. They grudgingly agreed to void the contract in the end. We've heard a lot of different rumors concerning your business. We would have to think twice if it were going to cost us millions. It seems that my hard position worked. Ultimately, they departed the company with disparaging remarks about the Americans. I was relieved. There was a chance that the situation would not have changed. Because foreign corporations can disappear anytime, dealing with them can be challenging. President Thompson congratulated me when he got back to the office and chastised Derek. The other person's vicious behavior is their fault. That's what any other worker would have done. Why am I being held responsible alone? President Thompson, not a fan of long-winded excuses, chastised Derek even more as he babbled. Derek bore the burden, whatever the reason. By not thoroughly reviewing the contract, he had put the company in peril. If you can't even read a contract properly, I can't trust you with important tasks. Derek was furious that President Thompson had effectively sidelined him. Why? I made a contribution to this business. It's his fault for getting involved. Derek lost his temper. President Thompson and I were speechless by his ridiculous logic. Do you even understand why I hired John in the first place? Thompson inquired. I know he worked abroad, but he dropped out of high school. Isn't that right? I don't deserve to be disturbed by someone I hired to perform my work. Derek answered, looking very irritated. President Thompson then started berating Derek. Enough already, Derek. John is a gifted person who, in 10 years, turned around our international branch. Are you making assumptions about him based only on his school history? That is untrue. Merely a means of bringing him into the group. How is a high school dropout capable of being competent? Even after receiving such a harsh scolding, Derek fired back. Derek was still unable to own up to his mistakes. Fed up, I opened my mouth to speak. Despite never having finished high school, I have 10 years of experience working with foreign corporations from my time at the overseas branch. We're thinking about doing business at the headquarters with foreign firms. Therefore, I was requested to come along this time. Derek shook and stammered in disbelief, staring at me as if he saw something strange. The issue is a corporation hiring a dropout like this one. Dropouts ought to simply bow down at the bottom. Derek's well-styled hair appeared tousled as he spoke ramblingly, as if he had forgotten what he was saying. He was obviously quite disturbed by my accomplishments within the organization. The result would probably have been the same even if he had understood from the start. I talked evenly and calmly up to Derek. Derek, do you realize how much trouble you've caused the company with this incident? Derek winced at what I said, but then he snapped back, his brows set in indignation. Cease talking. You're nothing more than a foolish incompetent. Enough already. You are the one who nearly brought harm to this business. I spoke up. President Thompson went over and spoke to Derek face to face while Derek bit his lip. It's true that you're well educated, but that doesn't give you the right to act like an authority figure here. Recognize that your conduct is inappropriate for a professional setting. But for him, it's the same. Derek shot back, attempting to place the blame on me for arriving late for the meeting. He's not behaving according to professional manners either. I can't believe I'm considered inferior to someone who can't even keep time. Thompson said, then show us the email correspondence with the other party. The true problem was that I had been absent because Derek had missiled me about the meeting time. It was actually 11 o'clock, not the 1400 hours I had been informed. It would be evident right away if we could view the exchanges between the two parties via email. After receiving a firm order from President Thompson, Derek reluctantly showed the emails. As it turned out, the customer and Derek had agreed via email that the appointment would take place at 11 o'clock. That Derek had lied to me was verified by this. That is untrue. I informed John at 11 o'clock, but he failed to appear. Derek's pathetic justifications were ignored. His foolishness left me stunned. It goes beyond that. Instead of providing John with any work, Derek has been forcing him perform housework and serve tea whenever he has the chance. And then, as if to rub salt into wounds, somebody else showed up. It was the cleaning lady, Emily. "What are you doing here, Emily? Who is this cleaner trying to get involved?" Emily was a cleaner, but instead of her typical work clothes, she was wearing a sharp suit. "Emily, I appreciate all of your hard work. Dad, it's okay," she remarked. The fact that Emily was President Thompson's daughter surprised everyone. Despite sharing a last name, nobody had ever considered the possibility that they were connected. Because it was against President Thompson's policy to give preference to family, Emily had to start out as a cleaner and learn about the inner workings of the business. Few executives were aware of this, and it was maintained a secret that she was the president's daughter. Emily, sensing my hatred for Derek, started going into great detail about everything. "This is unfair. That is merely unfair and cunning," Derek yelled. "If you had behaved properly, there would have been no problem, and you even crushed my cookies," Emily answered. Derek, who had scorned Emily by calling her merely a maid, paled to death. The speed at which the color left his face almost impressed me. Despite confronting many difficult obstacles, John never made an attempt to divulge company secrets. "He's a reliable individual," someone remarked. "You don't seem to be thinking like someone who should be in a leadership role." President Thompson said, "Your responsibilities as the head of your department are terminated." President Thompson made a bold and decisive pronouncement that no one dared to dispute. Derek fell on his knees, completely overcome with sadness. I was given the position of head of the sales department, in charge of negotiations with overseas businesses, a week later. Derek had formerly oppressed my old coworkers, but now they were working harder. Derek didn't get fired, but he did wind up working for me. His discontent was evident, but his haughtiness had vanished. He fell behind in his job and murmured complaints beneath his breath. "What are you doing, Derek?" "Nothing. If you have time to surf the web, you should be working on improving your German proficiency," I said. When I saw there wasn't enough corporate communication training or German language proficiency at our headquarters, I'd established a learning program in the language. I considered this to be essential. Yes, I did begin holding meetings with foreign corporations, but we were always undervalued when dealing with astute foreign business people. Maybe some of this might be attributed to the less forceful nature of Americans. My team's negotiating abilities quickly improved when I gave them some pointers, and we were able to close deals. Derek had thrown away my handbook, but now new hires were using it at Emily's suggestion. It had been read and authorized by President Thompson. Our company's success increased, particularly with the foreign branches. We had exposed the foreign company through our proactive information sharing with other businesses, and now it was isolated and posing a threat to us. It was said that they were close to filing for bankruptcy. This was a job where hard work paid off, and I felt really satisfied. But Derek was the only one who stayed glum and refused to learn. I could give him advice, but he would not listen. "Why do I have to be told such things?" he asked, always projecting an air of negativity as he expressed his displeasure. This attitude prevented any meaningful assignment from being assigned to him. It was immature to give Derek mundane jobs out of spite, but there was nothing admirable about him either. Eventually, these times came to an end. He didn't appreciate having me give him orders. Workers who had previously worked for him were moving up the career ladder quickly. It seems that his pride could not bear to see this fact. I gave up. "I refuse to work for a company that honors high school dropouts," he exclaimed, slapping his resignation letter down in front of me. I made no attempt to stop him. Rather, I agreed to his resignation. Subsequently, I learned that Derek made an unsuccessful attempt to join one of our rival companies. His impressive educational background was unable to make up for his haughty demeanor and poor command of German in interviews. Because of his reputation, There were a lot of speculations circulating in the sector. His high school knowledge would have been a terrific asset if he had been humble and ready to learn. But the chances of him finding work again were slim. Emily and I were dating in the interim. She was performing well in the accounting department and had formally joined the company with President Thompson's consent. She was the daughter of the president, but she worked hard and without conceit. "I could work hard because of your support," I said, "thank you," to her. "No, you were merely being truthful and honest. You were acknowledged because of your abilities," she answered. Gradually, what began as a dinner to express gratitude for her support became into a romance. We told each other how we really felt, and now we're talking about when to bring up marriage with President Thompson. Living together should be easy because we both like doing housework. I experienced some days of loneliness after my mother's death. I'm excited to start a new family with Emily now.
My name is Chloe, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down, not once, but twice. I guess I should start at the beginning. I was born to loving parents, Mark and Lisa Smith, in a small suburban town. Dad was a journalist, and Mom worked as a nurse. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Life was pretty normal until I turned 12. That's when everything changed. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and my parents were driving home from a dinner party. I was at home with my grandma, watching some silly cartoon when the phone rang. I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I heard my grandma's muffled sobs from the kitchen. The next few days were a blur. Mom died on impact, they told us. Dad survived, but barely. When I finally got to see him in the hospital, he was a shell of the man I knew. His legs were crushed, and the doctors said he'd never walk again. "Chloe," he croaked, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why he was apologizing. It wasn't his fault some drunk driver had plowed into their car. But as I grew older, I realized he was sorry for what our lives had become, for the struggles we'd face, for the mother I'd lost, for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, Mark Smith, was made of stronger stuff than he gave himself credit for. Once he was out of the hospital and settled into his wheelchair, he threw himself into his work. He'd always been a talented writer, and now he channeled all his energy into his job as an editor at the city's major newspaper. As I entered my teens, Dad made sure I had everything I needed. He encouraged me to join clubs, to make friends, to have as normal a life as possible. But the truth was, I preferred spending time with him. We'd watch old movies together, argue about books, and he'd help me with my homework. When it came time for college, Dad insisted I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." I was hesitant, but I knew he was right. So off I went to State University, majoring in accounting. It was there that I met Jessica, who would become my best friend. And through Jessica, I met her second cousin, Michael. Michael was kind, funny, and he didn't bat an eye when I told him about my dad. In fact, the first time he met Dad, they hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of classic rock. "Your old man's cool," Michael told me later. "And you're pretty amazing for taking care of him all these years." I shrugged it off, but inside, I was glowing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life. A life with love, laughter, and yes, even a family of my own someday. After graduation, life seemed to fall into place like pieces of a puzzle. I landed a job at the local tax service, and Michael started working as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 2 years before he popped the question on a crisp autumn evening in the park where we had our first date. I was over the moon, but there was one thing I needed to make clear. "Yes, Michael. But I can't leave my dad. He needs me." Michael's face broke into a wide grin. "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the 3 of us, right?" The wedding was small but beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. As I stood there, hand in hand with Michael, I felt like I was living a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its villains, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Karen, and sister-in-law, Emily. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. "So, your father is handicapped?" Karen had asked during our first meeting, her nose wrinkling as if she'd smelled something unpleasant. "He's disabled," I corrected, trying to keep my tone neutral. "But he works as an editor, Anne." "How nice," she interrupted, clearly uninterested. "Michael, darling, are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." I felt my face burn with anger and shame. Michael, bless him, immediately jumped to my defense. "Mom, Chloe is from a good family. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." That shut Karen up, but I could see the disapproval lingering in her eyes. Emily, taking cues from her mother, was equally cold towards me. After the wedding, true to his word, Michael moved in with Dad and me. Our life fell into a comfortable routine. I'd go to work at the tax office, Michael would be on the road for days at a time, and when he was home, we'd all have dinner together. But whenever Karen and Emily visited, the atmosphere in our home changed. They'd strut around like they owned the place, barely acknowledging Dad's presence. Once, I overheard Karen muttering to Emily, "It's a shame. Michael could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. What if they have children? Can you imagine the genes?" I was furious, but I bit my tongue. For Michael's sake, I tried to keep the peace. But it was getting harder and harder. One evening, after a particularly tense visit from Karen and Emily, I broke down in tears. Michael found me in our bedroom, sobbing. Hey, he said, pulling me into his arms. "What's wrong?" "Your mom and sister," I hiccuped. "They hate me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Michael's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words comforted me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles with Karen and Emily. As the months passed, Michael's trucking business began to flourish. He was always on the road, crisscrossing the country in his big rig. I missed him terribly when he was gone, but I threw myself into my work at the tax office and spent my evenings keeping Dad company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad into bed, Michael called. His voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "Chloe, I've been thinking," he said. "How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in a wheelchair. He could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden. Something to keep you busy when I'm on the road." The more he talked, the more I warmed to the idea. I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Dad's eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted. "And it would be easier to get outside." That settled it. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. We finally found the perfect place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a beautiful backyard. Taking out a mortgage was scary, but with Michael's income and mine, plus the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a sunny Saturday in spring, and I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty. "Thank you." We spent the next few months settling in, making the place our own. I planted a small vegetable garden, and Dad would sit outside for hours, soaking up the sun and fresh air. It was idyllic. Then came the housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, Karen and Emily. The party was in full swing when they arrived, fashionably late as usual. They sauntered in, eyeing everything with barely concealed envy. As we moved through the house, I could see the wheels turning in Karen's head. When we reached the master bedroom, she turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Chloe," she said, her voice low. "This would be perfect for Michael and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here. I felt like I'd been slapped. Excuse me? Oh, don't look so shocked, Karen continued. Your father isn't, well, he's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition. Before I could respond, Karen marched out to the patio where Dad was chatting with some guests. To my horror, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him towards the driveway. Karen! I shouted, running after her. What are you doing? If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside, she sneered. That's what you wanted, isn't it? For him to be outdoors? I was shaking with rage and disbelief. Thankfully, Michael had heard the commotion and came running. His face turned red with anger when he saw what his mother was doing. Mom, he bellowed. What the hell are you doing? Let go of Mark's chair right now. Karen looked shocked at Michael's tone. But honey, I was just. I don't want to hear it, Michael cut her off. You and Emily need to leave. Now. After they left, Michael apologized profusely to Dad and me. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I had no idea she would. I'm just so sorry. Dad reached out and patted Michael's hand. It's not your fault, son. Some people, they just can't understand. Life settled into a new rhythm after the housewarming incident. Karen and Emily kept their distance, which suited me just fine. Michael threw himself into his work, taking on more long-haul routes to help cover our new mortgage. I split my time between my job at the tax office and tending to our home and Dad. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. Our life fell into a comfortable routine. Michael was on the road more often than not, but when he was home, our little family was happy. Dad's health was stable, and he seemed content spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was at work when my phone rang. An unfamiliar male voice greeted me. Mrs. Thompson? This is Officer Rodriguez from the Highway Patrol. My heart dropped into my stomach. Yes? I managed to squeak out. I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, Michael Thompson, has been in a serious accident. The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words like head-on collision and didn't make it floated around me, but I couldn't process them. It wasn't until I heard myself thanking the officer and hanging up that reality began to sink in. Michael was gone. The next week was a haze of grief and disbelief. I moved through the motions of planning the funeral like a robot, barely able to comprehend what was happening. The day before the funeral, I steeled myself and called Karen. I thought she deserved to hear about her son's death from me, not from some impersonal newspaper obituary. Hello? Karen's sharp voice answered. Karen, it's Chloe, I said, my voice trembling. It's about Michael. He's gone. There was an accident. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, to my shock, Karen's voice came back, dripping with venom. This is your fault, she hissed. You forced him to work so hard, driving that truck to pay for your fancy house. You killed my son. I was stunned. Karen, that's not. Save it, she snapped. I expect you to give him the best funeral money can buy. But don't expect a penny from us. You made your bed, now lie in it. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. How could she be so cruel? How could she blame me for this? The day of Michael's funeral dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. The church was packed. Michael had been well liked in the community, and it seemed like half the town had turned out to pay their respects. After the service, as people filed past to offer their condolences, I was struck by the absence of Michael's mother and sister. They hadn't even bothered to show up to their own son and brother's funeral. Dad reached out and squeezed my hand. Their loss, sweetie. We're family, and we'll get through this together. As we pulled into our driveway, something seemed off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange, because I was sure I'd turned everything off before we left. "Did you leave any lights on, Dad?" I asked, frowning. He shook his head. "No, I don't think so." As we got closer, I could see movement inside the house. My heart started racing. Were we being robbed? On the day of Michael's funeral, no less? I helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But as we approached the front door, I heard familiar voices inside. My blood ran cold as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Karen and Emily in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Karen turned to me, her face a mask of false sympathy. "Oh, Chloe, dear. We're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Michael's gone." I was speechless. Emily chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Don't worry, you can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy." I could feel the rage building inside me. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Karen had the audacity to look offended. "This house belongs to us now. All of Michael's property does. We're his real family, after all." "Like hell you are," I exploded. "Where were you today?" "At his funeral?" "Oh, that's right, you couldn't be bothered to show up." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "We were busy making arrangements. Now, be a good girl and start packing. We'll need you out by tomorrow." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a tear for Michael, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to kick us out of our home? "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. Karen and Emily exchanged worried glances. They clearly hadn't expected me to fight back. "Now, Chloe," Karen began, but I cut her off. "No. You have exactly 5 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Michael and I bought it together. You have no right to be here." Maybe it was the steel in my voice, or the fire in my eyes, but Karen and Emily finally seemed to realize they'd gone too far. They gathered their things and left, but not before Karen turned to me with a sneer. "This isn't over, Chloe. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." The days following Michael's funeral were a blur of grief, anxiety, and paperwork. I threw myself into sorting out Michael's affairs, partly to keep busy and partly out of fear that Karen and Emily would try to swoop in and take what wasn't theirs. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart raced as I answered, fearing it was Karen making good on her threat of legal action. "Mrs. Thompson," a crisp, professional voice asked. "This is James Anderson from Anderson and Partners. I'm calling regarding your late husband's will." I felt a glimmer of hope. "His will? I didn't know he had one." "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Thompson came to see us about 6 months ago. He asked that we contact you in the event of his passing." I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind reeling. Why hadn't Michael told me about this? What did it mean? The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. Anderson's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Smith, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing for us to settle near his desk. "I'm sorry for your loss." Mr. Anderson opened a file on his desk. "Now, as I mentioned on the phone, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes." I held my breath as Mr. Anderson began to read. "I, Michael Thompson, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Chloe Thompson." I gasped. Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Anderson continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Chloe use these resources to care for herself and her father, Mark Smith, whom I have come to love as my own." Tears were streaming down my face now. Even from beyond the grave, Michael was taking care of us. There's more, Mr. Anderson said gently. Mr. Thompson left a letter for you. He handed me an envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. My dearest Chloe. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Mark. Please know that you two were the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and Mark were protected if anything happened to me. You're my real family, Chloe. You and Mark. Not them. Take care of each other. Live your lives to the fullest. And know that I'll always be watching over you. All my love, Michael. I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing. Dad was crying too, his weathered hand patting my arm. Mr. Anderson gave us a moment before speaking again. Mrs. Thompson, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured. Given the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy. I looked up, sniffling. What does that mean? It means, Mr. Anderson said with a small smile, that you'll be receiving a substantial sum. Enough to pay off your mortgage and then some. As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were going to be okay. Michael had made sure of it. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Karen's sleek sedan. Oh no, I muttered. What now? Sure enough, Karen and Emily were waiting on our front porch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Michael's letter in my pocket and the strength of his love in my heart. Chloe, Karen began as we approached, her voice sickly sweet. We need to talk about Michael's estate. I stood tall, looking her straight in the eye. No, Karen. We don't. Michael left everything to me. It's all legal and official. And do you want to know why? Because we were his real family. Not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing on my property. For once, Karen was speechless. Emily tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. With one last venomous glare, they got in their car and drove away. The weeks following our meeting with the lawyer were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into settling Michael's affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout came through, and true to Mr. Anderson's word, it was enough to pay off our mortgage, with plenty left over. One afternoon, as I was going through Michael's desk, I came across a small notebook. Curious, I opened it and found pages filled with his messy scrawl. It was a journal of sorts, filled with his thoughts and plans for our future. Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids, one entry read. Want to make sure they have the best start in life. My heart clenched. We had talked about having children someday, but had decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Michael's private hopes and dreams, I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. Oh, Michael, I whispered, clutching the notebook to my chest. We had so many plans. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting to the journal, to the future we'd never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Michael. He was smiling, holding out his hand to me. It's okay, Chloe, he said in my dream. Everything's going to be all right. I woke up the next morning feeling different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something had changed. As I got ready for work, a wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it to the bathroom in time. But as the days went by, the morning sickness persisted. At first, I chalked it up to stress and grief. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered another possibility. Finally, after a week of this, I found myself standing in the pharmacy aisle, staring at pregnancy tests. With trembling hands, I bought one and hurried home. The 3 minutes I waited for the result were the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the test, I saw 2 clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, a mix of emotions overwhelming me. joy, fear, grief, hope, they all swirled together in a dizzying cocktail. "Chloe?" Dad's voice came through the door. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. Dad's expression immediately changed from concern to alarm. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked. I held up the test, my hand shaking. "I'm pregnant, Dad." I fell into his arms, sobbing. He held me, stroking my hair like he used to when I was a little girl. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Chloe. And this baby is a gift. A piece of Michael that will live on." His words struck a chord in me. This baby was a part of Michael, a continuation of our love. Suddenly, the fear began to recede, replaced by a fierce determination. "You're right," I said, wiping my eyes. "This baby is a gift. And we're going to be okay." Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's my girl. Now, let's get you something to eat. You're eating for two now, after all." As we made our way to the kitchen, I felt a sense of hope blooming in my chest. Yes, the road ahead would be challenging. But with my father by my side and Michael's child growing inside me, I knew we could face anything. As my belly grew with our child, I found strength I never knew I had. Dad was my rock, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the two of us, eagerly anticipating the arrival of the newest member of our little family. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Karen's sedan. What could they possibly want now? I made my way to the front of the house, one hand instinctively cradling my swollen belly. Karen and Emily stood on our porch, looking uncomfortable and slightly desperate. "Chloe," Karen began, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. We need to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Emily chimed in, her eyes darting around nervously. "We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment. Just until we get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they'd put us through, they had the audacity to ask for more? "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm but calm. "That's not possible. I don't want to communicate with you anymore." Karen's eyes narrowed as they fell on my pregnant belly. Her face contorted with a mix of shock and disgust. You're pregnant?" she spat. "Already? You little prostitute. I can't believe you've already found a new man. Michael's body isn't even cold in the ground." I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down. I didn't make excuses and say that it was Michael's child. I didn't want my baby to have such a grandmother and aunt. Instead, I smiled, a small, secretive smile that seemed to unnerve Karen even more. "My personal life is none of your concern," I said calmly. "Now, I think it's time for you to leave." Karen looked like she wanted to say more, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She turned on her heel, grabbing Emily's arm. I watched as they drove away, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I had stood my ground, protected my family, and maintained my dignity. Michael would have been proud.
I'm Emily. I was a 25-year-old living a quiet, unremarkable existence with my boyfriend Mike in a relationship that had seen better days. We'd been together since college, a pair drawn together more by familiarity than by the fervent passion of star-crossed lovers. Our arguments were frequent, often about Mike's disinterest in planning for the future or his latest gaming marathon that would last well into the early hours, leaving me to sleep alone. We were two people dancing around the inevitable conversation of, "Where's this going?" without ever actually taking the floor. It's not that we didn't care for each other. It's just that somewhere along the line, we stopped trying to make it work. My parents, Sue and George, were the antithesis of us. Married for over 30 years, they still exchanged loving glances and shared private jokes, their bond seemingly unbreakable. They were my foundation, the steadfast love I aspired to find for myself, even if it wasn't going to be with Mike. On the evening of the crash, I remember arguing with Mike over something as trivial as unsorted laundry. He had promised to do it, and once again, the promise was as empty as the laundry basket was full. "Can't you just do one thing you say you're going to do?" I had asked, exasperation straining my voice. "It's just laundry, Em. It'll get done. Eventually," he had replied, his attention fixed on his computer screen. The argument had fizzled out as they usually did, with neither of us truly addressing the underlying issues. Later, as I sat in the back seat of my parents' car, the warmth of their chatter was a soothing balm to the residual frustration from the argument with Mike. They were celebrating another year of Mom's life, and their joy was infectious. Then, the world turned on its axis. Headlights merged with the sound of metal on metal, and everything went black. When I awoke, it was to the antiseptic smell of a hospital, the relentless beeping of the heart monitor, and a heavy blanket of dread. The doctor's words were clinical and detached, but the message was clear. My parents didn't make it, and my legs, my perfectly normal, taken-for-granted legs, might never carry me again. The truth settled like a stone in my stomach. I was suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Mike, the man I had just argued with about laundry, was now my only connection to a life before the crash. The life where my biggest worry was whether he'd sort the whites from the colors. As the reality of my parents' absence and my potential paralysis began to truly register, a hollow despair took root in me. The future, once a landscape of possibilities, now seemed like a barren field. The hospital room was a bubble where time moved both too quickly and not at all. After what seemed like an eternity of white walls and echoing silence, Mike walked in, his parents, Janet and Bob, a step behind him. The atmosphere was thick with a somberness that made my heart sink even lower, if that was possible. Mike pulled a chair up next to my bed and took my hand, his usual bravado absent. His parents stood by the door, a united front of awkward concern. "Hey, Em," Mike began, his voice a rough whisper. "I've been doing some thinking, a lot of thinking, actually." "Thinking?" I echoed, my voice dull. "About what?" "About us," he said, and his eyes met mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. All of this, it's made me see how short life can be. I wanted to say something, to ask what he meant, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. "I don't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore because it might never come," he continued, squeezing my hand. "What I'm trying to say is, will you marry me, Emily?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. It was the last thing I thought I'd hear, especially now. I searched his face for a sign of the impulsive Mike I knew, the one who acted first and thought later. But all I saw was earnestness. His mother, Janet, stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "We want you to be a part of our family, Emily. We'll take care of you." "And it's not out of pity," Bob added quickly. "It's because we love you, and we want to support Mike in taking this step." I was stunned, my mind racing. This was a lifeline, unexpected, and maybe even a little reckless, but a lifeline nonetheless. I looked at Mike, really looked at him, and saw not just my sometimes immature boyfriend, but a man offering his support in the most uncertain time of my life. Mike, My voice trailed off as I tried to gather my thoughts. It's okay, Em. You don't have to decide right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel, he said, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. I thought about my parents, about the unwavering love and support they had always shown me. Wasn't this what they would have wanted? For me to be loved and cared for no matter what? Mike, I don't know what the future holds for me, for us. But yes, I found myself saying, the words stronger than I felt. Yes, I'll marry you. A smile, the first genuine one I'd seen in days, spread across Mike's face. Janet let out a soft sob, covering her mouth with her hand, and even Bob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Moving into my parents' house with Mike should have been a fresh start, a new chapter. The house was too big for just one person, and everywhere I looked, I saw memories of my parents. I thought having Mike with me would fill some of those empty spaces, but I was quickly learning that his presence was a reminder of what was missing, not a replacement. The first few days, he was attentive, always checking on me, making sure I had everything I needed within reach. But as days turned into weeks, the attentive husband act began to wear thin. Mike started spending more time on his computer, his headphones on, shutting me out. One evening, as I maneuvered my wheelchair into the kitchen, I found him staring blankly at his screen. "Mike, have you thought about looking for a new job?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "The insurance won't cover everything, and the bills are starting to pile up." He didn't look away from the screen. "I told you, Em, I'm taking care of you now. That's my job." "But I can take care of myself during the day," I pushed back, feeling a twinge of frustration. "You don't need to be here all the time." Finally, he turned to face me, his expression a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite read. "What do you want from me, Em? I'm here, aren't I?" I was taken aback by his tone. "Being physically here isn't the same as being present, Mike. I need a partner, not just a roommate." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile. "You know what, Em? Maybe I need more than this, too. Maybe I wasn't cut out to be a nursemaid." His words stung, and I watched him storm out, the door slamming behind him. I was left alone in the silence of the kitchen, the weight of his words settling around me like dust. I wasn't just alone. I was lonely. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how quickly our modest honeymoon period had ended. The vows we had taken felt like they were from another lifetime. The Mike, who had lovingly promised to be by my side, in sickness and in health, seemed like a stranger now. As the weeks dragged on, his absences grew longer, and the excuses more flimsy. He was either out with friends or lost in a digital world that didn't seem to have room for me. I felt like an obstacle in his life, a burden he hadn't anticipated. One particularly tough day, when the pain was bad, and the house felt more like a mausoleum than a home, I heard the front door open. Expecting Mike, I called out, "Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," he replied, his voice distant. "I'm just grabbing a few things, then I'm heading out again." I wheeled myself to the hallway, watching as he rifled through a drawer for his keys. "Going out with friends?" I asked, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. He paused, keys in hand, and sighed. "Em, I need some space, okay? It's not easy for me either, all this." I nodded, biting back tears. "I know. I just thought we could maybe spend some time together, like we used to." He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe when things settle down a bit, I gotta go." The house felt emptier with each passing day, a vast space filled with silence and the ghost of better times. It wasn't just Mike's absence or the silence left in the wake of my parents' voices. It was the small things that started to go missing. A vase my mother loved, a silver frame holding a family photo, a painting that used to hang in the hallway. I first noticed it when I was trying to distract myself with memories. I wheeled myself into the living room, intent on looking through the photo albums. But as my eyes scanned the room, they fell on the bare patch of wall where the painting had been. Confusion knotted my brow. "Mike!" I called out, unsure when he had last gone out. There was no answer, and the emptiness of the house seemed to echo back at me. That evening, when Mike returned, I asked him, "Have you seen the landscape painting that used to be in the hallway?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Oh, that old thing? Yeah, it was getting dusty, and I figured we could use the space for something else." Something about his casual dismissal didn't sit right with me. "But it was my mom's favorite," I said, a tremor of unease in my voice. He shrugged, his attention still half on his screen. "We can get another painting, Em. It's no big deal." But it was a big deal. The items that went missing next were unmistakable, things that had been in my family for years. One afternoon, I caught Janet, Mike's mom, in the act. She was bustling around the living room with a big black garbage bag. "Janet, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp with alarm. She jumped, a guilty flush creeping up her neck. "Oh, just some spring cleaning, dear. This place is cluttered with so many old things." "But those are my things," I protested, my heart rate picking up. There, she cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "We're just making things nicer for you. You'll thank us later." I watched her like a hawk every time she visited after that, but the thefts became sneakier, more calculated. And every time I brought it up, I was met with reassurances that it was all in my best interest. One night, lying in bed, I turned to Mike, who was scrolling through his phone, as had become his nighttime ritual. "Mike, your parents have been taking things from the house. My things." He didn't look up. "Mom's just trying to help. You know she's got a knack for this stuff." "Help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "By taking my parents' belongings?" He sighed, finally setting his phone down and turning to face me. "Look, Em, they think we should be looking forward, not backward. They're just trying to take some of the load off you." I wanted to scream, to rage against the violation, the disrespect. But I was tired of fighting, tired of questioning my own sanity. "This isn't what I want," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. Mike reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Try to get some sleep, Em. Things will look better in the morning." I couldn't take it anymore and confided in Anna, my closest friend, who was also a massage therapist. She had been helping with my rehabilitation, her visits a rare source of relief. "Anna, things are going missing around the house," I confided as she worked on my stiff muscles. "And I can't shake the feeling that Mike and his parents are behind it." Anna paused, her hands stilling on my shoulders. "Have you talked to Mike about this?" "I have, but he just brushes it off. Says his parents are helping us by decluttering." I let out a hollow laugh. "But it's only my family's things that are disappearing." Anna's brows furrowed in concern. "That doesn't sound right, Em. Do you want me to do something? Maybe come by more often? Keep an eye out?" The idea sparked something in me, a plan forming from the embers of my frustration. "Could you, I don't know, maybe help me set up some sort of camera or something to record what's going on when I'm not in the room?" With a nod of determination, Anna agreed. "I'll bring something over tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." True to her word, Anna came back the next day with some discreet recording devices, which she placed in strategic locations around the house. It felt like something out of a spy movie, and if I wasn't so desperate for the truth, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it all. A few days later, Anna returned with the recordings, and we sat down to listen. The voices of Mike and his parents filled the room, and the blood in my veins turned to ice as their scheme unfolded through their casual conversation. "And once we get her committed, the house and everything in it will be ours," Mike's voice said, clear and cold. "Yeah, The place will sell for a fortune, and all those antiques? Pure profit, his mother added, her tone greedy. We just need to make sure Emily doesn't catch on before we have everything in place, his father chimed in. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to their betrayal. These people, who had promised to care for me, to be my family, were plotting against me. Anna reached over, her hand gripping mine tightly. We have to do something, Em, she said, her voice laced with anger. I wiped my eyes, the sorrow quickly giving way to a steely resolve. We will. I'm not going to let them get away with this. The morning after listening to the recordings, I tried to act normal, but every word they said, every smile they gave, felt like a lie. It was during breakfast when I noticed something was off. The usual noise of the city that drifted in through the open window was absent. I wheeled myself over to see what was happening, only to find that the ramps that allowed me access to the garden were gone. Mike! I called out, my voice laced with panic. Where are the ramps? He came into the room, feigning ignorance. The ramps? Oh, they were looking a bit worn. Thought they needed fixing. I stared at him, the man I thought I knew. And you didn't think to tell me? How am I supposed to get around? His gaze was evasive as he shrugged. I just thought you'd be safer inside for now. You know, until we get new ones. The room felt like it was spinning, and it wasn't from my injury. Safer or trapped? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, leaving me stewing in a mix of anger and helplessness. Later, when I asked Janet about it, she was syrupy sweet with false concern. We're just looking out for you, dear. We wouldn't want you to have an accident, she said, touching my shoulder with feigned tenderness. I pulled away from her touch, feeling the sting of their deceit. I didn't realize needing ramps qualified as a hazard, I replied, my voice steady though my insides were shaking. Janet's eyes hardened for a moment before she regained her composure. We're just trying to help, Emily. It's for the best. That night, as I lay in bed, the darkness felt oppressive. Mike was out again, probably drowning his guilt in cheap beer and cheaper thrills. I reached for my phone, the screen a small beacon in the dark, and dialed the number Anna had given me for emergencies. Anna, I whispered when she picked up. They've removed the ramps. I'm literally trapped in my own home. Her voice was firm, a lifeline in the tumultuous sea I was drowning in. Hang tight, Em. I'm going to make some calls. We're going to sort this out. Next day, I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell. My heart pounded as I maneuvered towards the entrance. It was Anna, flanked by a man and woman wearing crisp suits and stern expressions. They were from a local disability rights organization, here to assess my living situation. Beside them was my lawyer, Mr. Hammond, clutching a leather briefcase. Emily, we're here to make things right, Anna said, her determination matching the resolve in my chest. Mr. Hammond stepped forward. We need to establish the facts first, Emily. I'll need to see the house. Check against the inventory of your parents' belongings. As we moved through the house, the representatives from the service took notes, their disapproval clear at the missing ramps and the blatant disregard for my welfare. Mike walked in during the commotion, surprise etching his face. Em, what's going on? Who are these people? I looked at him, really looked at him, allowing the full weight of my gaze to settle on his shoulders. I'm taking back control, Mike. This is my lawyer, and these are advocates for people with disabilities. They're here to ensure my home is safe and that my rights are respected. Janet and Bob entered the fray, confusion turning to fear as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Emily, darling, what is this about? Janet's voice trembled. It's about my rights, my home, and the truth, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mr. Hammond is here to confirm the inventory of my inheritance. Mr. Hammond opened his briefcase, pulling out documents and photographs. We have detailed records of all items bequeathed to Mrs. Harper. It seems several are missing. Bob's face paled. Now, Emily, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I replied. The recordings Anna had provided playing in my head. And I have more than just missing items to discuss. Mike's parents looked at each other, the facade of the caring in-laws crumbling before my eyes. Mike stood there, silent, the reality of the situation dawning on him. Anna moved closer to me. We also have evidence of the conversations you've had regarding Emily's property and well-being. The advocates from the Disability Service spoke up. Removing access to the ramps is a direct violation of Mrs. Harper's rights. We'll be taking action. As Mr. Hammond laid out the evidence of their theft and their plans for my future, I saw the trap I had been in from the outside. But now, the tables had turned. I was no longer the victim in their game. I was the one calling the shots. Mike finally found his voice. I can explain. But I shook my head. Save it, Mike. I've heard enough. Janet started to cry, and Bob put an arm around her, but there was no comfort to be found in their deceit. The day of the trial was a culmination of everything I had endured. The courtroom was stark, the air thick with tension. Mike and his parents were on one side, looking nothing like the family that had once promised to care for me. I was on the other, with Anna beside me and Mr. Hammond at the ready, with his briefcase of evidence. As the proceedings began, the judge looked down at us from his bench, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. We are here to examine the evidence regarding the allegations of theft and the premeditated exploitation of Emily Harper, he said. Mr. Hammond presented the recordings, the inventory discrepancies, and testimonies from the disability advocates. The evidence was damning, and Mike's family could do little but squirm under the weight of their own deceit. Janet sobbed quietly, her sobs a soundtrack to the unraveling of their scheme. "We never meant for things to go this far," she whispered, when it was her turn to speak. The judge's voice was firm as he addressed them. "You took advantage of a vulnerable person. There's no excuse for your actions." Mike stood, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Em. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at him, the history we shared playing out in a flash before my eyes. "Sorry isn't enough, Mike. You chose this path." The gavel came down like the final word on the life I had once known. Mike and his parents were found guilty. Reparations were ordered, and they were to have no further contact with me. With the help of Anna and a dedicated team, I started physical therapy. Each small movement was a victory, each step a testament to my resilience. My legs, once lifeless, began to tingle with new strength. One day, as I managed to stand with the help of parallel bars, Anna cheered me on. "Look at you, Em, you're doing it!" The smile on my face was mirrored in her own. "I am, aren't I?" The joy bubbled up from a place I thought had been broken beyond repair. And so I moved forward, one day at a time. The house, once a mausoleum of my past life, was slowly transformed back into a home, a sanctuary where I healed and grew stronger.
Apparently, she was not a full-time employee. She introduced herself as a freelance system engineer. Stanley had asked her to work at his company. The meeting went unbelievably smoothly. She presented a flawless system proposal, and I couldn't find anything to question. Above all, her explanations were concise and easy to understand, appealing to people's senses. Even the bosses who weren't familiar with the system could understand everything from her explanation, so I didn't need to add any. It was a meeting that would usually take twice as long, but it ended before we knew it. Stanley always said that shorter meetings were better. After confirming a few points about future meetings with Stanley, we called it a day. As Ashley was packing up her laptop, I gathered up my courage to speak to her. I was nervous, thinking, what if I was mistaken? "Do you remember me?" I asked. At my words, she seemed to smile a bit. "I remember. You've done well, David. I heard you're in charge of the system. The last time we exchanged words was back in high school, and it felt strange to be talking to her again as adults. What have you been up to since then? You gave up on your exam too. My words came out more accusatory than I intended. This was my only acknowledged rival. Her sudden disappearance left me feeling betrayed, and I couldn't shake that off. It was a story from more than 10 years ago. Surely she must be annoyed being blamed for something so far back. Just as I expected, she knitted her brows with a look of annoyance. It was a facial expression I'd never seen before. What I've been up to since then is none of your business, isn't it, David? You really have no tact. I was infuriated by her dismissive tone. What the hell? The nerve of you. I'm just worried about you. I unintentionally raised my voice. Is something wrong? Mr. Stanley approached. I didn't know what to say. What do you want to know, Miller? About my college situation. I couldn't go. I didn't even graduate high school. My highest level of education is middle school. Is that what you wanted to know? I don't need your concern. Don't make fun of me. She glared at me as she stated this clearly. The person I've cared about so much is a middle school dropout. I couldn't accept this reality at once. She was the only one I considered a rival. To be honest, there was even a part of me that admired her. Don't be ridiculous, Ashley. You've hit rock bottom like that. I knew my words were childish, but all I could do was berate and belittle her education. Nonsense. You just have to work your way up with your abilities. Her words left me dumbfounded. I felt like I'd been hit back. It was as if my narrow-mindedness was being held up in front of me. While I was at a loss for words, she left the meeting room quickly. I could see Mr. Stanley whispering something to her. Her slender arm was briefly wrapped around Mr. Stanley's waist in response. Their natural interaction suggested that their relationship was more than just temp and employee. The Ashley Brown I knew no longer existed. In addition to feeling lonely, a strange sense of despair engulfed me. I realized that I had idealized Ashley. Meanwhile, despite my relationship with Ashley, the project was proceeding smoothly. I was gradually getting used to the fact that she was not the person I had idealized. In fact, everything went smoothly with her. She seemed to understand everything I was thinking, and she constantly met my expectations. It felt as if we had been together for many years. Hey, are you listening to me? Lily was pouting in dissatisfaction next to me. It seemed I had been absent-mindedly recalling something about Ashley during our cafe date on our day off. Honestly, I wasn't listening to Lily at all. Sorry, I'm just a bit tired from work. I tried to make an innocent excuse with a smile. Lily puffed her cheeks, looking displeased. Humph. Lily, who can be a little selfish, dislikes being put in second place. She's the type that won't be satisfied unless she is the top priority. I used to find that adorable, but today it's not charming at all. Hey, about that temp girl, the shady one with silver hair. I heard she dropped out of high school, lol. Lily chuckled with a snobbish smirk. It seemed to be rumored in the office. I've even had coworkers question whether it's okay to trust the main system to a high school dropout. Each time I had to hold back my rising anger. I never thought that my girlfriend would say the same thing. It doesn't really matter once you're in the real world, right? If you got the talent and the skills, that's what matters, I retorted. I had no intention of defending Ashley, but it came out sounding like I was. Lily didn't like that. She didn't like that I disagreed with her opinion. What? Have you been charmed by her too, David? Weren't you the one saying anyone without a college degree is trash at the company? Come to think of it, there was a time when I said something like that. Now I realize how arrogant and foolish I was. In fact, high school dropout Ashley is still a few steps ahead of me. Apparently, she even dated Stanley. She eats men up and throws them away at her assignments. Lol. I couldn't hold back my anger at Lily's contemptuous remarks. What the hell do you know about Ashley? You happily spreading such vulgar rumors, you're the worst. I snapped. Normally, I don't raise my voice. Lily was taken aback. We rarely had fights since we started dating, but I just couldn't stand it when Lily made fun of Ashley. Why do I have to be scolded? Did I say something wrong? Lily's face teed and glaring at me looked disgustingly ugly. She might have not meant to be bad. I probably shared the same mindset with her all along. Sorry to interrupt. Isn't it a waste of time to fight over me? Suddenly,
We were surprised by Ashley's voice coming from behind. She seemed to have been working at the cafe counter. She had her hoodie up, so I didn't notice Ashley at all. Come to think of it, this cafe is near Ashley's workplace. We were the ones stepping into Ashley's territory. I just told the truth. I didn't do anything wrong. Lily glared at Ashley and, shouting, she bolted from the cafe. All I could do was watch Lily's back as she left, abandoned in the cafe. Ashley moved over to my table, bringing his laptop with him. Isn't that your girlfriend, David? You're not going to chase her, Ashley said without taking his eyes off his laptop screen as she saw our quarrel. I couldn't reply immediately. As I remained silent, Ashley sighed softly. Why did you two argue like that? Well, wasn't that a harsh way to talk about Ashley? You don't know he was a top-notch student with both beauty and brains. Judging him like he's a loser, isn't that awful? I felt strangely fled as I was being questioned. I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted Lily to understand that. I was arguing with her to defend Ashley, but Ashley just stared at me with cold eyes. These were not the calm, bright eyes Ashley had back in our student days. They were unbelievably cold and dark. Do you think I'm happy about what you did? She said, her voice choked with suppressed anger. How can you speak so confidently without knowing anything? That was just for show. Is flaunting your own righteousness a male trait? My homeroom teacher in high school was like that too. It's ridiculous. Ashley began to talk about her past. She pretended to be a straight A student in order to get a scholarship. Apparently, her family fell apart during middle school, and it seemed like Ashley was the one holding the family together. Of course, going to college was out of the question. Ashley had been aiming for a special scholarship. Considering her grades, she could get a scholarship from any college. She said she wanted to escape from her home as soon as possible. Then she was called by the homeroom teacher who had something to discuss. She was told to give her scholarship spot to another student and take the SAT, which made her doubt her ears. The homeroom teacher was smiling, satisfied with his decision. He didn't even notice Ashley, who was in despair right in front of him, being forced to take the SAT. Ashley worked harder than ever. But all that effort was in vain, as her family had to run away in the middle of the night due to financial difficulties. There was no way she could take the SAT under such circumstances. Hard work pays off, huh? That's the word of those who were rewarded for their efforts. Ashley ended her story with this line. That's why, David, I get annoyed when I see you. You've been blessed since high school and you shine. Honestly, I didn't want to meet you. She slammed her laptop shut, crumpled up the 2 checks, and with a thin smile, Ashley left the cafe after quickly settling the bill, leaving me dumbfounded and at a loss for words. Listening to Ashley's footsteps, I wondered what I did wrong. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like denying my own life. But that would just make me feel miserable. I downed my cold coffee in one gulp. Ever since running into Ashley on a day off at a cafe, her demeanor became even more businesslike than before. I could tell from her attitude that she wanted to get this job done and cut ties with me as quickly as possible. Even though I was hurt by her attitude, we carried on with our work in a businesslike manner. Mr. Stanley started to accompany her to meetings that she used to attend alone. There was no chance to speak with her one-on-one anymore. I could tell she was avoiding me completely. Her attitude began to irritate me, and I found it harder to concentrate on my work. To make matters worse, I reached my limit when I saw the two of them getting along so well during meetings. I heard rumors that they'd broken up, but even then, seeing her put complete trust in Mr. Stanley stoked my jealousy, and I couldn't stop it. That's when I made a big mistake. It was a communication error about a system specification change. Distracted by the two of them, I made a beginner's mistake. Even though it was a beginner's mistake, a communication error about a specification changes could be fatal. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the specification changes during our last meeting. I realized my mistake when I was shown the developed system. As soon as I realized it, I broke out in a cold sweat, and my heart began to pound. Mr. Stanley's expression changed quickly when he heard what I said. Even if there's some leeway in the schedule, specification changes are challenging. What do you mean by that, at this late stage? Specification changes now. Mr. Stanley, who has always been calm, raised his voice. I've been watching my team build this up. I guess it's no surprise that the words at this point are slipping out of my mouth. I bowed my head and apologized many times. We still have some leeway in the schedule, so it should be fine. Please let me check the details of the specification changes, I said, trying to control the situation. Mr. Stanley, who had changed color, said in a quiet voice. I think she tried to prevent my mistake from being known to other colleagues. Ashley laughed a little and said, We can do it. In the end, all we got was a reply that the delivery date would be just in time. Ashley said, Don't worry, as she passed me, who couldn't hide my upset at making my first mistake since becoming a working adult. Just before the delivery date, I brought some gifts and went to Ashley's company. The lights were still bright even after work hours. When I rang the doorbell, Mr. Stanley answered. When I handed over the gifts, he smiled happily and said, Thank you, we've received some gifts. When he called out to the company, men with unshaven faces appeared one after another and swarmed around the bag of gifts. I'm truly sorry for the inconvenience, I said, bowing my head. Mr. Stanley said, It's okay, and smiled. Thanks to Ashley's full support, I think we can make it in time. I heard that Ashley, who took on the specification changes, was blamed by other employees when she brought the changes back to the company. There was probably criticism, saying, Now you decide to take on such a reckless task. It was Ashley herself who silenced them. She bowed her head and asked for their support, assuring them that she would follow through on everything and take full responsibility. Ashley is a contract worker. She navigates this industry on her own. She hardly ever fawns over others or relies on them, and yet she bowed her head deeply and asked for cooperation. The office quieted down in an instant. Making Ashley beam like that. David, I'd like you to tell me what kind of relationship you and Ashley have. Stanley, still smiling, spoke those words, but his eyes weren't smiling. I was a little taken aback by his serious gaze. Well, I got rejected by Ashley. She told me she had someone she likes since her school days and can't forget him. As he told me this while picking up a sandwich from the catering, I thought my heart was going to stop. Oh, you went to the same school as Ashley, right? Do you know what kind of guy she liked? His teasing made me sit up straighter. I realized he was pushing me forward. She was talking about me. I responded lightly, and Stanley gave me a playful punch in the chest. Pointing to a door in the back, he informed me, She's napping. Hearing his words, I ran to the door at the back. Without knocking, I opened the door to find Ashley sleeping soundly on the couch. The sound of the door closing made her eyelids twitch slightly. Shut up. Ashley's voice was scratchy. She seemed even smaller than when I saw her last time. Ashley, wake up. I have something to ask you. I kneeled down near the couch where Ashley was sleeping. She seemed to wake up all at once when she heard my voice. Jumping up, she looked around wildly. David, pulling her blanket up to her chest, she looked at me, unable to hide her surprise. Stanley told me. Who's this person you can't forget? Her face went white at my words, and she glared at the door, probably glaring at Stanley in the other room. Her face turned red in no time at all. I looked into her eyes and asked again. She just blushed and didn't answer. I heard you were supposed to take the same college entrance exams. The next moment, I felt an impact on my face. It took me a few seconds to realize that she'd thrown a cushion at my face. I have forgotten about such old memories. The sight of a fuming Ashley, her face bright red, is unbearably adorable. Usually, she's full of self-assuredness, but right now, she looks just a little bit younger and flustered. I feel closer to the Ashley I know. That night, I was dumped by Lily. It's your responsibility to pick me up, Ashley. She clicks her tongue, looking at me after my slightly crafty remark. I wait silently for her to speak. Finally, she opens her mouth after the long silence. Ashley's feelings are now completely laid bare. If you were dumped, I guess it can't be helped. If you behave, I'll take you in. I think there must be an unbreakable bond between her and me. If only we had just told each other we loved each other back when we were students. I'm amazed at how far around we've come. From now on, I want to spend my life with her. I want to take my time hearing about her life when I wasn't around. So when's the wedding? I ask Ashley, riding on the wave of excitement. She gives me an exasperated look. For now, make sure you propose properly once the job is done. The moment her expression shifts from exasperation to a full smile, my life changes color completely. I want to promise her a life happier than anyone else in the world. I truly feel it from the bottom of my heart. She gets up from the sofa and returns to her desk, immediately resuming work. I sit next to her, trying to help out as much as I can. There's a bug that keeps occurring here, I explain, pointing at the source code displayed on her computer. Her fingers writing out the code for review hesitate for a moment. What if we do this? Ashley quickly begins to refactor the program. I am in awe of her technique. David, you're pretty talented. It makes it easy to work with you. We're a great team. Looking at the system now running smoothly, she smiles joyfully. It was just like being back in our student days. The classmate who was the only one who could shake my feelings since high school soon became my wife.
I never thought a simple evening could shatter my world. It was a quiet return from Aunt Linda's retirement party. The house was silent, almost eerily so, as I walked in. Marcus, my husband of 3 years, was sprawled on the couch, absorbed in his phone. "Hey, Evie," he mumbled without looking up. I forced a smile, my mind elsewhere. I headed straight for our bedroom, my thoughts on the cherished watch my late father had given me on my 21st birthday. It was worth more than $12,000, but its sentimental value was priceless. He had scrimped and saved for years to buy it for me, his only daughter. Each time I wore it, I felt his presence, his love. But as I opened the drawer where I always kept it, my heart sank. It was gone. Just gone. Panic surged through me. "Marcus," I called out, my voice trembling. He appeared in the doorway, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to my growing despair. "What's up?" he asked, finally looking up from his phone. "The watch. My watch is gone." I could barely get the words out. His eyebrows knitted in confusion. "Are you sure? Maybe you misplaced it?" "Misplaced it? I always kept it in the same spot. How could it just disappear?" "No, Marcus, it's been stolen. We need to call the police." I was near hysterical now, but Marcus shook his head, a strange certainty in his voice. "No need for that, Evie. It's definitely here in the house. Don't worry." His words hit me like a cold slap. How could he be so sure? Doubt and suspicion began to creep into my mind, mingling with my distress. And then it hit me. Clara, his mother. "You think your mother took it, don't you?" The accusation spilled out before I could stop it. Clara had always admired the watch, a little too keenly for my comfort. Marcus's face hardened. "Don't start with that, Evie. Mom wouldn't do such a thing." But I was beyond listening. My mind raced with anger and betrayal. Clara, with her nosy ways and her constant interference in our lives, it had to be her. "I'm calling the police," I declared, my decision firm. "No, Evie, don't." Marcus's voice was sharp, but I was already dialing. I reported the theft, my hands shaking. As I hung up, Marcus just stared at me, a mixture of disbelief and anger on his face. "I can't believe you just did that," he said quietly. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but instead, I stood there, feeling the first cracks in our marriage. The watch was gone, but something more valuable had been lost. Trust. As Marcus retreated to the living room, I slumped against the wall, a sense of isolation wrapping around me. The police would come, questions would be asked, and accusations made. But deep down I knew that no matter what happened next, things would never be the same again. In that moment, I realized the bitter truth. I was living with a man who might choose his mother over his wife, and the thought chilled me to the bone. The days that followed were a blur of cold silences and unspoken accusations. Clara, Marcus's mother, was oblivious to the storm brewing in our home, or so it seemed. Her visits, once merely annoying, now felt like a deliberate invasion. On a Friday evening, Clara arrived with her usual pomp. "Evelyn, darling, I brought your favorite, lemon pound cake," she announced, placing the cake on the kitchen counter as if she owned the place. I forced a smile, my grip tightening on the kitchen towel. "Thank you, Clara. That's thoughtful." Clara waltzed around the kitchen, humming a tune, while I struggled to keep my composure. She opened cabinets, rearranged my spices, her every action setting my nerves on edge. Marcus, as usual, was no help. "Mom's just trying to be nice, Evie. Don't be so uptight," he whispered, his hand on my shoulder. I shrugged off his touch, my frustration boiling over. "Nice? Marcus, she's treating our home like it's her personal playground." Before he could respond, Clara called out, "Evelyn, darling, why don't you set the table? I'll finish up here." Set the table? In my own home? I felt like a guest, and a barely tolerated one at that. Dinner was an excruciating affair. Clara dominated the conversation, her every word dripping with condescension. "Evelyn, you really should try this new facial cream I found. It does wonders for those pesky wrinkles." I bit my tongue, my anger simmering. Marcus just smiled, oblivious to the barbs hidden in his mother's words. The final straw came when Clara started discussing our personal finances, a topic I had always considered private. "Marcus, dear, you really should invest in real estate. Evelyn's little job is cute, but you need something more substantial for the future." I couldn't take it anymore. "Clara, with all due respect, our finances are none of your concern." The room fell silent. Clara's eyes narrowed, a glint of malice in them. "Oh, I see. Well, I'm just trying to look out for my son. After all, we can't all come from money, can we?" Her words stung, a reminder of the modest background I came from. I felt Marcus's hand on mine, a silent plea for peace. But peace was the last thing on my mind. As Clara continued to prattle on, oblivious to the hurt she had caused, a plan began to form in my mind. If Marcus wouldn't stand up to his mother, then I would. Clara needed to learn that she couldn't just walk over people, and I was going to be the one to teach her. After dinner, I excused myself, claiming a headache. Alone in our bedroom, I allowed the tears to flow. Marcus's mother was ruining our marriage, and he was letting her. But I wasn't going to be a victim any longer. Clara had taken my watch, my peace, and my dignity. It was time for her to pay. My mind raced with ideas, each more satisfying than the last. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold, and I was ready to serve it up in spades. Clara had no idea what she had unleashed. But she would. Oh, she definitely would. The following week was a slow burn of anticipation. Each day, I plotted my revenge against Clara, fantasizing about the moment I would put her in her place. But nothing prepared me for the audacity of her next move. It was a Saturday morning. Clara had arrived unannounced, as was her habit now. Marcus had stepped out to run errands, leaving me alone with her. The tension in the air was palpable. I was in the living room, trying to read, when Clara sauntered in, a smug smile on her face, and there it was on her wrist, my watch. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of rage and disbelief. "That's my watch," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Clara glanced at the watch nonchalantly. "Oh, this old thing, I found it lying around. Thought it might suit me." I stood up, my hands shaking. "You had no right to take it. It's mine." Clara laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "Finders keepers, dear. Besides, it looks better on me." The nerve of her. I felt a scream building inside me, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't just about the watch anymore. This was about respect, about boundaries. "You need to give it back. Now," I demanded, my voice steely. Clara waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be such a drama queen, Evelyn. It's just a watch." Just a watch? It was the last gift from my father, a symbol of his love and sacrifice. And she treated it like a trinket. I took a deep breath, trying to control the tempest inside me. "You don't understand. That watch means a lot to me. You have no idea." But Clara just smirked. "Well, now it means a lot to me too, so I guess I'll be keeping it." I couldn't believe her audacity. It was clear she had no intention of returning it. My mind raced with anger and hurt. This was a declaration of war. "Fine, keep it. But remember, Clara, every action has consequences," I said, my voice icy. Clara laughed again, clearly amused by my threat. "Oh, Evelyn, always so dramatic. Don't worry, I'll take good care of your precious watch." As she sauntered out of the room, I felt a resolve solidify within me. Clara had crossed a line, and I was no longer going to play the passive victim. Marcus returned home later, and I confronted him. "Your mother took my watch. She's wearing it like it's hers." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom can be a bit eccentric. I'm sure she didn't mean any harm." Eccentric? This was outright theft. I could barely contain my fury. "Marcus, this isn't about being eccentric. She stole from me, from us, and you're just going to let her get away with it?" He avoided my gaze, a sure sign of his discomfort. "I'll talk to her, Evie. I promise." Talk to her? That was it? I realized then that Marcus would never stand up to his mother. It was always going to be me against her. But I was ready. Clara had made a powerful enemy in me, and I was going to make sure she regretted ever crossing me. I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, my mind churning with plans of revenge. Clara had underestimated me, and she was going to pay for it. I was going to get my watch back, and I was going to make her suffer for ever thinking she could take it from me. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. Clara had no idea what was coming for her, but she would learn. They all would. The days leading up to my plan were filled with a simmering rage. Clara's audacity to take my watch and flaunt it was unbearable. But what I discovered next pushed me over the edge. It was a Thursday evening, and Marcus was late from work. I decided to do some cleaning to distract myself. As I was tidying up the guest room, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. Clara's belongings, neatly tucked away in the closet. Fury and betrayal swirled within me. I confronted Marcus as soon as he walked through the door. "Why are Clara's things in our guest room?" I demanded, barely containing my anger. Marcus's face paled. She's been staying here while we're at work. She said it was to help out around the house." Staying here? Without my knowledge? I felt like I was in a nightmare. "And you agreed to this? Behind my back?" I was shaking with rage. Marcus tried to placate me. "She's just trying to be helpful, Evie. I didn't think it would be a big deal." Not a big deal? His mother, the woman who had stolen from me, was invading our home, and he thought it wasn't a big deal? "This is our home, Marcus. Your mother has no right to be here without my consent." Marcus sighed, looking exhausted. "I'll talk to her, Evie. I'll sort it out." But his promises were empty. I knew then that I had to take matters into my own hands. The next day I waited for Clara to arrive. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find her standing there, the stolen watch glittering on her wrist. "Evelyn, dear, I brought some groceries," she said, breezing past me. I closed the door and faced her, my resolve steeling. "Clara, we need to talk." She looked at me, a smirk playing on her lips. "About what, dear?" "About the watch, about you staying here without my knowledge. This ends now." Clara laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Evelyn, you're being ridiculous. I'm just helping out my son." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "You're not helping, Clara. You're overstepping and you're stealing. I want my watch back, and I want you out of this house." Clara's expression hardened. "I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn, and the watch is mine now. Get used to it." Her blatant disrespect and arrogance fueled my anger. "This is not the end of this, Clara. I will get my watch back, and I will make sure you regret ever crossing me." Clara scoffed. "Threats, Evelyn, really? You're no match for me." But she was wrong. I was more than a match for her, and I was going to prove it. As she went about her day, invading my space and my life, I put my plan into action. I contacted a lawyer, ready to fight for my rights, for my dignity. Clara had underestimated me, but she was about to find out just how determined I was. The battle lines were drawn. Clara had made a grave mistake, and she would soon realize just how costly it was. I lay in bed that night, my mind racing with plans and strategies. I would not rest until I had reclaimed what was mine and put Clara in her place. She had awoken a fire in me, and I was ready to burn everything down if I had to. The war was on, and I was ready to fight to the bitter end. Clara had no idea what she had unleashed, but she would. She would learn that some lines should never be crossed. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I expected. It was a crisp Saturday morning when I set my plan into motion. I waited for Clara to leave the house for her usual shopping, the watch conspicuously flashing on her wrist. The moment the door closed behind her, I made my move. I called the police, my voice steady but filled with righteous anger. "I'd like to report a theft. The thief is my mother-in-law, Clara. She's stolen a very expensive watch from me, and I have proof." The operator's calm voice was a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. "We'll send an officer over to take your statement, ma'am. Please ensure the item is indeed missing and prepare any evidence you have." I hung up, my heart pounding in anticipation. Today, Clara's reign of terror would end. I didn't have to wait long. The police arrived just as Clara was returning, her arms laden with shopping bags. The look on her face when she saw the police car was worth everything I had endured. "What's going on, Evelyn? Why are the police here?" Clara's voice trembled, a crack in her usually composed demeanor. "I've reported the theft of my watch, the one you're wearing," I said, my voice cold. Clara's face drained of color. "You can't be serious. This is just a family matter." The police officers stepped in, their presence authoritative. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions about the watch you're wearing." Clara's composure crumbled as she realized the gravity of the situation. This This is just a misunderstanding. Evelyn gave me this watch." I stood firm, my resolve unshaken. "That's a lie. That watch was stolen from me and I want it back." The officers took statements from both of us. Clara's lies twisted and turned, but the truth was clear as day. The evidence was on her wrist. Finally, with a heavy heart, the police took Clara into custody. As she was led away, her eyes met mine, filled with betrayal and fear. But I felt no sympathy. She had brought this upon herself. Marcus arrived in the midst of the chaos, his face a mask of confusion and concern. "Evelyn, what's happening? Why is my mother being arrested?" I looked at him, the man I had loved, now a stranger to me. "She stole my watch, Marcus, and you did nothing, so I did what I had to." He looked lost, torn between his wife and his mother. "But Evelyn, she's my mother. Couldn't we have handled this privately?" "Privately? After everything Clara had done? No, Marcus. This isn't just about a watch. It's about respect, boundaries, and truth, something your mother knows nothing about." As the police car drove away, I felt a sense of closure. The watch was returned to me, a little worse for wear, but still precious. Marcus tried to talk to me, to explain, to apologize. But his words fell on deaf ears. Clara's arrest had exposed the deep cracks in our marriage, cracks that perhaps had always been there. I retreated into the house, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. I had stood up for myself against Clara, but now I faced a new challenge, deciding the fate of my marriage. As I sat alone, the house eerily quiet, I realized that this was just the beginning. Clara's downfall was my victory, but it was also a stark reminder of the choices I had to make. I had fought for my dignity and won. Now it was time to fight for my future. The fallout from Clara's arrest was immediate and tumultuous. The news spread like wildfire, igniting whispers and stares in our community. But the hardest part was facing Marcus, who seemed a shadow of the man I married. A few days later, Marcus came to me, his eyes weary and voice heavy. "Evelyn, Mom's in trouble. She's facing serious charges, and her savings, they're gone. She's talking about selling her house." I listened, a mix of vindication and sadness swirling inside me. "Marcus, she brought this on herself. She stole from me, from us. There are consequences to actions. But she's my mother, Evelyn. I can't just abandon her," he pleaded, his loyalty torn. I sighed, my heart aching. "I understand she's your mother, Marcus, but where was your loyalty when I needed you, when she was invading our home, our life?" He had no answer, his silence speaking volumes. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and strained silence at home. Clara's once proud demeanor crumbled under the weight of her actions. She was found guilty and faced not only legal repercussions but also public shame. Marcus, caught in the crossfire, suffered at work. His performance declined, and soon rumors of his mother's actions reached his workplace. He resigned, unable to bear the humiliation and stress. One evening, as we sat in our living room, the distance between us like a chasm, Marcus spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Evelyn, I think Mom and we're going to move. Start over somewhere else." I looked at him, the man I had once loved so deeply. "And what about us, Marcus?" He looked at me, pain etched on his face. "I don't know, Evelyn. I don't know if there's an us anymore." The words hung in the air, a painful truth we both had avoided. As Marcus and Clara's world unraveled, I felt a bitter satisfaction. Clara had paid the price for her arrogance and deceit. But the cost was high, too high. The day Marcus left, the house felt empty, a shell of the home we had built together. I watched as he drove away, Clara in the passenger seat, both defeated and broken. I sat alone, the silence deafening. My revenge had been successful, but it left me hollow. I had stood up for myself, but at what cost? I thought about the watch, now safely tucked away in my drawer. It was more than just a timepiece. It was a reminder of my strength, my resilience, but it was also a reminder of the price of revenge. The sweet satisfaction was fleeting, replaced by a lingering sadness. I had won the battle, but the war had taken its toll. As I sat in the quiet of my home, I realized that this was not the end, but a new beginning. I had to rebuild, to find myself again. The watch, my father's gift, was a symbol of that journey, a journey to rediscover who I was, beyond the scars of betrayal and revenge. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it. With or without Marcus, I would move forward, stronger and wiser. Karma had struck, and its lessons were harsh but clear. It was time to leave the past behind and embrace a new future. One step at a time. In the weeks following Marcus's departure, I found myself in a state of reflection. The house, once filled with the noise of our life together, now echoed with silence. It was in this silence that I began to confront the reality of what had transpired. My revenge against Clara had been successful, but it had come at a great cost. I had lost my husband, and in many ways, a part of myself. But amidst the ruins, I found a sense of empowerment. I had stood up for myself, something I realized I had been afraid to do for too long. One evening, as I sat looking at the watch, a symbol of my victory and loss, my phone rang. It was Marcus. His voice was different, tinged with regret and sadness. "Evelyn, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I should have stood by you. I let you down." I listened, a myriad of emotions swirling within me. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot. But I think it's too late for us now." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. "I know," he finally said. "I just hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday." I sighed, a weight lifting off my shoulders. "I already have, Marcus, but forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. We both need to move on." After the call, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life with Marcus and Clara was over, but a new one was waiting to be written. In the months that followed, I focused on myself. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had long neglected, and started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. Clara, on the other hand, faced her own demons. The legal consequences of her actions had left her financially and emotionally drained. The once proud and imposing figure was now a shadow of her former self. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard of her struggles, but I felt no joy in her downfall. It was a sad end to a sad story. As for Marcus, he tried to rebuild his relationship with his mother, but the damage was done. Their bond, once unbreakable, was now fragile and strained. He moved to a different city, starting over in a bid to escape the shadows of the past. And as for me, I learned to find joy in the little things. The watch, once a symbol of conflict, became a reminder of my strength and resilience. It was a testament to my ability to overcome adversity, to stand up for what was right. I realized that life was too short to be spent in anger and revenge. The experiences had taught me the value of forgiveness, not for the sake of others, but for my own peace. As I moved forward, I carried with me the lessons of the past. I had faced betrayal and come out stronger. I had learned the hard way that sometimes the best revenge is to let go and live well. The watch ticked on, marking not just the passage of time, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was the author, writing a story of hope, healing, and new beginnings. In the end, I knew that the greatest revenge was in living a life full of happiness, a life that was mine and mine alone. And with that realization, I stepped into a future filled with endless possibilities, the watch on my wrist a constant companion on this journey.